Welcome. Good. Have a seat.
Thank you.
So what's going on in Ken Bennett's world?
We are having fun. We just spent several months training all the election officials around the state, make sure that they're all up to speed on changes in the laws so they can run the elections next year. That's one of the duties we have at the Secretary of State's office.
Great. And I know that to catch these people up, I know you've been with us before. You're a native of Arizona.
Fifth generation Arizona.
Wow. Awesome.
In fact, I was just in Douglas yesterday and found my great-great-grandfather's red brick home that he built in the late 1800s. It was on 8th Street there in Douglas.
Wow.
I knocked on the door, but nobody came, so
yeah.
I hope it's not vacant.
He was probably out.
He was out, probably, yeah.
I know you've got an extensive private sector background, too. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you. A lot of people know me from my public sector, city council and legislature and secretary and all that, but I've worked for about 30 years in the private sector, got a degree from ASU here in accounting and ran a family business up in the Prescott area. The family eventually made its way from Douglas to Gilbert, stopped over just long enough in Mesa for my grandmother to be born here, but then they went to Prescott and they opened a little gas station, and that over the years became Bennett Oil, and I ran that for about over 20 years. Grandma and Grandpa's phone number in Prescott was 49. So they've been there since Santa used to...
Wait. You're serious?
Yes. Yeah, their phone number was 49. 49.
That's awesome. Did they have to go through Sarah at the switchboard?
Yes. The gas station was 71, and the home was 49, and so you'd pick up the phone, and the operator would come on, give me Don down at the station at 71. So anyway.
Not a lot of call forwarding back then.
No.
Well, tell us, what's the overview of your role as Secretary of State?
4 things Secretary does. We try to oversee elections. We have a business services office, trademarks, trade names, partnerships, UCC filings, Wells Fargo, one of our biggest customers, file all the UCC liens on business loans. And then we're kind of the record-keeping arm of state government. And then the 4th duty of the Secretary of State is in case of a vacancy in the governor's office, they become the governor. I'm the lieutenant governor. We're one of only 3 states that does not have a lieutenant governor position. The number 2 person is the Secretary of State.
So was it last week Governor Brewer was out and you were the acting?
I was acting governor last week. And you barely noticed, didn't you?
We wish we would have had the meeting last week. It'd be awesome to say the governor was here. Well, you know, I can't help but notice, I know it's cold and flu season, but you've shown up today with...
Kleenex boxes.
With Kleenex boxes, so...
let me just tell you what...
Sure, what's going on here?
After I left the legislature, I was president of the Senate for 4 years and been in the legislature for 8, and about 2007, went back into the private sector. I'm also on the board of the Cancer Treatment Center Hospital out in Goodyear and work with some other companies in alternative fuel. But after I left the legislature and we had balanced the budget and we had over $1 billion in the bank, the economic downturn occurred and the state budget got in a huge mess. We were second worst only to our friend to the West, California. And a coworker started asking questions. How did the budget get so bad? And where's the money come from? Where's it go? And she invited me to explain the state budget to her women's lunch club up in North Phoenix, the Creative Women of Pinnacle Peak. She said, would you come and explain the state budget in 20 minutes? That's what I said. So I said, well, I better get creative. And so I actually came up with a way of explaining where the state's money goes using Kleenex boxes. So I'll just jump in.
Yeah, please. Do your thing. I love this.
Each box represents $1 billion that the state spends. I'll start with the yellow boxes. That's the general fund. The general fund is the main pot of money that the legislature and the governor have to decide how to spend each year. The general fund usually is between $9 and $10 billion. And it comes from 2 taxes, sales taxes and income taxes. The state doesn't get any property tax. That goes to local governments. But right now, the general fund is just about $9 billion. And of that $9 billion, about $4 billion of it goes to our K-12 school system. So this is everything related to the K-12 system. All the school districts, the charter schools, the School for the Deaf and Blind, State Board of Education, the State Department. Everything related to K-12 is usually just slightly less than half of the general fund budget. Then, as you can see here, there's about that's about $1 billion that goes to our higher education system. That's the universities and the community colleges. This is one that you're probably intimately familiar with, Mark, the
sure.
prison and court system. We spend.
I wish that wasn't funny.
We spend about $1 billion a year in the prison and court system. We then spend about $2.5 billion in a variety of programs related to health and welfare. The largest single program here is the indigent health care system, ACCESS, Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. But this also includes Department of Health Services, Child Protective Services, which has kind of been in the news lately, unfortunately, Department of Economic Security, the State Mental Hospital, Department of Developmentally Disabled, a variety of others. There's about $2.5 billion in that, and then there's about all the rest of state government that is paid for out of the general fund is less than $500 million. So there's the general fund, the yellow boxes at about $9 billion. Then we have some other funds, they're in the white boxes. We collect about $1 billion a year and spend it on the state highway and transportation system. That $1 billion comes from the taxes that you pay when you buy gasoline or diesel for your vehicles, and the little license tags that we have to pay each year for our license plates. That generates about $1 billion, all goes to transportation. There's about $1 billion that we collect of these other funds that goes to health and welfare. This $1 billion comes primarily from taxes on two products, and you can probably guess what they are: alcohol and tobacco. But almost all gets spent on health and healthcare programs, many of which are helping people with problems from alcohol and tobacco, but that's the way we do it. Then there's about $500 million that goes to higher education from these other funds, and hundreds of other state programs that are funded from these other funds. So this is kind of the state money: the yellow, the general fund, and the white, the other funds. Then you have to acknowledge some of the local money that goes to the schools, for example, from the property tax. For example, the K-12 school system, in addition to about $4 billion a year it gets from the state general fund, all of the school districts throughout the state collect and spend about $4 billion of the local property tax money. And I have to put a stick behind here it's called propping up the state budget, but we don't want it to fall over here. Now, the property tax money does not go through the legislature. Each school district sets a tax rate that's applied to your home and business values, and you pay your property taxes, and a pretty good sized chunk of that goes to the schools, and some goes to cities and counties and other districts. Statewide, there's about $1 billion of those property taxes, these lavender boxes, that goes to the community college system, which is part of the higher education system. And then one of the biggest chunks of money that we kind of keep track of is called federal and other money that comes into the state. Most of it is federal. For example, these are the light blue boxes. There's about $2 billion of federal money that comes into the K-12 school system. Most of those monies are associated with two groups of students: special education students and low income. So these are all your special ed programs, your free and reduced lunch programs, anything based on the income level of the household. There's about $2 billion of these federal and other monies that ends up in higher education. Now, most of this $2 billion is in fact federal money, or about 2/3 of it. 2/3 of this $2 billion is federal money that comes into the state and ends up in the universities and community colleges. The other 1/3 is the tuition money that the students pay as a portion of their expense. So the tuition and federal money is about $2 billion. By far the biggest chunk of money that comes into the state each year, and this was before the Affordable Care Act, goes into health care. And my other stick fell down here, so I'll grab it real quick. Whoa. So in addition to the about $3.5 billion of state money that we spend on health care, we receive each year about $6.5 billion of federal money. This is called Medicaid in most states. And in most states, the federal government is running a Medicaid program separate from whatever the state's doing. But in Arizona, we were the last state to join Medicaid, and we did so on a special agreement where we take their money and our money and we combine it all together and we run it through Access, because qualifying for Access is basically whether or not you qualify for Medicaid. So it's kind of on a matching deal. We get $2 of federal money and we put it with, you have to match that with $1 of state money, and we put it all together. And so we have about a total of $10 billion in health and welfare. And then there's some other stragglers. There's the state lottery and the workers' compensation system, SCF Arizona, $500 million each in the Department of Administration, which is state employee retirement and benefits and other things. And about $500 million of mostly EPA money that comes into the state to clean up something that got dirty. And then there's $500 million or so of just a variety of other federal monies that comes into the state. So the total amount that we really kind of track at the state is not just the $9 billion or so in the general fund, the yellow boxes. The total we track is about $30 billion. But you can see the big three. About $10 billion a year in K-12, about $10 billion a year in higher education, about $10 billion in health and welfare, and about $4.5 billion in higher education. And everything else combined is 5 or 6 total. So those are by far the big three. And then I was asked by several folks, well, what happened to the general fund over the last few years, and how did it get so out of balance? So I had to come up with a second. You can tell I like props here. Just a real quick synopsis of what's happened to the general fund over the last, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, Mark. I'll pull it back.
I'm good.
You good? Everything on these two charts kind of explains what happened to the yellow boxes over the last 4, 5, 6 years, because those are the ones that were short. When the federal government doesn't have enough money to send all the blue boxes out to all the different states it's supposed to, it borrows it. I don't know if Wells Fargo helps with that or not. They borrow money or print it. I think the Chinese actually do more than Wells Fargo does in that case. But, so in the general fund, everything over here is just the yellow boxes over there. Last time the state budget was really balanced without some accounting tricks and gimmicks and temporary tax increases was back in '07. That was the last year I was president of the Senate. Anyway, we were spending.
What was that? That was the last year you were president of the Senate?
Yeah, that's when I was at the legislature. We were spending about $9.5 billion out of the general fund. Fortunately, the sales and income taxes were generating about $9.5 billion. And because the economy was healthy in '05 and '06, and we did not spend every dollar that came in, well, some wanted to, but we resisted that urge, and we had saved up about $1.1 billion in the state's reserve funds. We call it the rainy day fund. In 2008, unfortunately, they increased the spending to about $10.5 billion, about the time that the economic downturn started to occur, and the revenue slipped from 9.5 to 9. So they had about a $1.5 billion shortage. They used almost all of the rainy day fund, $900 million of the rainy day fund monies that we had saved up, transferred it into the general fund, called it revenue for that year. They also started playing some accounting tricks and gimmicks. The state uses a cash accounting system, which means it only recognizes an expense if it actually writes the check. It's like my wife says, are there checks in the checkbook? There must be money there. No. Anyway, they say instead of sending a payment out to the schools when they're supposed to, the 12th payment goes out in June, and we cut off the budget at the end of June. So when the state gets in a pickle, they sometimes resort to delaying payments out to the school districts. And if they can take the June 15th payment, instead of send it out in June, wait till July 1st. July 1st is in the next budget year, and it looks like they didn't have a June payment this year. But now they've got 13 next year. Well, they did that to make the budget look a little more balanced than it really was. That, on paper, it saved $300 million. The other thing they do sometimes, or did, is they sweep money from some of those other funds that are supposed to be used to maintain the highways or whatever else other funds are supposed to be used for, transfer it into the general fund. They did that with about $300 million, and that got them through the first budget short year $1.5 billion. In 2009, this was kind of a unique year because the Napolitano administration set the initial budget, and then she left about halfway through, and Governor Brewer became the governor. And I'm not sure all the reasons because I wasn't in the legislature at the time, but even though they knew that with the economic downswing in full downswing, they were originally projecting that about $8 billion was going to come in from the tax revenue. They somehow set the spending level at over $11 billion in 2009. Now, they almost immediately realized they couldn't do that. They tried to cut it back a little bit. When by the time Governor Brewer became the governor, she tried to cut it back to about $10 billion in spending. Very hard to cut the budget in the middle of the year, but they cut it to about 10. Unfortunately, the economy was going down faster than they were afraid of, and it didn't drop to 8, it dropped to about $7 billion coming in. So either way, they had about a $3 billion shortfall in 2009. They used the last $200 million of the rainy day fund money. They did another delayed payment out to all the school districts. So this year they delayed the June 15th payment into July of the next year. This year they delayed the May and the June payments into July of the next year. They started sweeping huge sums of money from all the other funds that are supposed to be used on whatever they're supposed to be used on, about $800 million. Started borrowing money. They mortgaged a bunch of school buildings around the state that had been paid off and were debt-free. And all of that, almost $525 million, came from that and some other borrowing. That got them through this year. And they started using large sums of money from the federal stimulus program that was helping the states with their budget, even though the federal budget was worse than our budget. But they were borrowing and printing. In 2010, they cut the spending back to about 9.5, back to 07 levels. Unfortunately, the economy continued to worsen. The $7 billion coming in from sales and income taxes dropped to about 6.5. They had a second $3 billion shortfall 2 years in a row. At that point, we were second worst only to California. California's shortfall was 32% of their budget. We were about 31.5. They were out of rainy day fund money. They delayed another month's payment out to the school districts. So now they're delaying April, May, and June's money into July. They swept a $400 million from all the other little funds. They borrowed $1,000 million. That's $1 billion. $735 million of that came by selling the state capitol and all of the Capitol buildings in the complex there to a big real estate investment group or somebody that now rents the buildings to us. So we rent the Capitol now. And we used large sums of the federal stimulus money, about $1.5 billion. 2011, they cut the spending from 9.5 to about 9. So that's about the level we saw over there. Fortunately, the economy didn't worsen. The 6.5 that was coming in kind of bottomed out right there. That's when they went to the voters of the state to ask if they would increase the sales tax by 1 cent per dollar for 3 years. And the voters said yes. That extra 1% brings in about $1 billion a year. So that new billion plus the 6.5 that was coming in brought the revenue up to about 7.5. That still left them about a $1.5 billion shortage. Out of rainy day fund money still. They didn't do any more delayed payments to the schools, fortunately. They swept another $300 million. They borrowed another $400 million. They actually mortgaged the lottery. They got a big loan from some banks and pledged the next 10 years of all the lottery ticket sales. And then they used large sums of the federal stimulus money. And we're almost done. Then we can take some questions or break out a Kleenex box and cry about it. In 2012, they cut the spending to about 8.3. Why such a precise number? I see Sandra's got a look on her face right here in the front row. 8.3. First reason was that with the 1 cent sales tax in place and the economy starting to grow back a little bit, they thought that they predicted that the revenue would grow back to about 8.3, and that would give them a balanced budget. But the real reason they picked 8.3 was the federal stimulus money that was still coming into the state. The federal law had a provision in it that said, if the state wants to receive its full share of the federal stimulus money, it cannot cut its level of spending its own money below what it was spending in 2006 before the whole economy went in the tank. And if we had a 2006 column here, that was the spending level in the general fund in 2006. So that's kind of why they picked that as the spending level in 2012. They thought 8.3 was going to come in. Fortunately, the economy improved a little bit better than anticipated. Extra 300 million. 8.6 came in, which gave rise to a huge argument at the Capitol for about 45 days of what to do with all the extra money. I'm serious. There were about 5, 6 ideas. I'll be politically correct and say that one group unanimously sent a letter to the governor saying all of that extra 300 million should go to increase the spending dollar for dollar as soon as possible. Another group said, no, let's put it back in the rainy day fund. Another group said, let's pay back some of the things that we borrowed, save some interest or rent or things. Or let's pay back some of the money we swept from some of the state agencies, or catch up on our payments to the schools. 5 or 6 ideas, but essentially they just kind of kept the money in the cash balances. But that gave them a balanced budget, although it was during the time they had the temporary 1-cent sales tax. But during the previous 4 years, they were really out of balance by about a total of $9 billion. If you're short 1.5, 3, and 1.5. And they got through that period by using the about $1 billion we had in the rainy day fund, delayed the payments to the school districts for a little over $1 billion, about $2 billion of the sweeps, about $2 billion of borrowing, and about $3 billion of the federal stimulus money. Now that program's done, and we don't have to pay the money back, and then to bring you right up to speed, and we're very frugal at the Secretary's office, couldn't afford a full board, so 2013, they increased the spending to just shy of 8.7, about 8.6 maybe. With the 1-cent sales tax still in place and the economy growing, they predicted that the revenue would grow to about 9.1, which it did. In fact, I think it exceeded that a little bit. So they had some surplus in the 12 and 13 budget. But that was the last year of the temporary 1-cent sales tax. That was not extended or made permanent by the voters. And so that ended at the end of the 2013 budget year. So that $1 billion a year coming in from that extra 1-cent sales tax went away. That meant that for this year, that 9.1 became 8.1, but the economy is still growing a little bit. This year, I think they're predicting that the revenue is going to come in at about 8.4. Their spending, though, is at about 8.8. So we're actually back into a deficit position this year because the 1-cent sales tax went away. But we have some surplus that was built up in these couple of years, and so we'll probably get through 14 and 15 okay, but 16 could really be a problem. And that's the state budget in 20 minutes.
Wow. Now, from what I gathered, we could all help out if we just smoked and drank more.
That's yes. Yeah, one of those boxes. That's it.
Well, you know what? As complicated as this is, you've done a great job on kind of breaking it down. I don't want to. I know you could ask questions all day, but does anybody have a quick question for Ken? We could right up here in the front row. There's a microphone coming your way.
One of my concerns is that the K through 12 looks like it's a dinosaur. It's just awesome. And
dinosaur big?
Yeah, big. And how is that in comparison to what other states are doing in the education system, and how reflective is that on how our performance is?
Typically, you will hear that Arizona is near the lowest amount per student that we spend compared to most other states. The performance of our students is actually somewhere in the middle usually. So we might actually be getting a pretty good bang for our buck if we're near the lowest on the amount we spend, but maybe just below average on the performance of our students. And that's probably the next Kleenex Box presentation for me to do, is to take this stack and spread it out and show you where it goes within the whole school system. But just generally speaking, probably, well, in the K-12 school system statewide, we have about 50,000 teachers, and we have 52,000 other employees. So for every teacher, there's one or more other employees in the system doing something. So probably about 40% of the money goes to teachers, About 40+% goes to everybody else in the system, and the last 15 or whatever percent is turning the lights on and running the buses and this cafeteria and the libraries and you know, on and on and on. So one of the biggest opportunities I think we have is to figure out, you know, this is not an insignificant amount of spending that occurs every year, and how do we get that to be more efficient, more of it into the classroom so that it's benefiting the students? Good question. I think we should use what's called priority-based budgeting, and we should take the first chunk of all the dollars that get spent in K-12 each year and put it in a special fund that the districts and charter schools can only use for teacher salaries. And we should put enough into that special fund, that priority number one fund, to give some pretty significant increases in teacher pay and hire a few more teachers so that we can reduce class sizes. And then tell the districts, you can use the other 60% on whatever you want to use it for. But you're not going to take money out of this fund to use, you know. Now, they'll run out of money on priority 102 or 112 or whatever. But if you run out of money on 112, then go back to 111 and say, do I need that much for 111? But you don't cut teachers in order to fund number 113.
Anybody got?
Anybody else? Yes.
I know we can see this on Channel 11 later, but is there another place we can view this to show our employees or anybody else that asks?
This is on YouTube, and it's on Vimeo. There's a website where you can see it on Vimeo or YouTube. Now, I'm going to ask Mesa 11 to provide me the tape from this. This will probably be upgraded, or I'll use this and load it up onto YouTube so that people can go to it at any time. And I think you can also get to it in my campaign website, BennettArizona.com. Bennett, Arizona, fully spelled out.com.
That was very subtle. I like the way you did that right there. What would that be all
Thanks,
about,
Mark.
Ken?
What would that, Bennett, Arizona?
Yeah, what would that be for?
I'm running for governor next year.
There you go.
And the governor, thank you. The governor is term limited. She served a part of Governor Napolitano's term and then a full term of her own. So even though she every so often floats this balloon that maybe she's not term limited, she is. As am I, as Secretary of State. So I've announced last month that I'm going to run for governor.
And you have experience. You were governor last week.
There you go.
See? You know what? We're already over time a little bit, but I bet we got time to squeeze in one more question. Anybody? Oh, right over here. Dale Gardner has one. Microphone's coming your way, sir. By the way, I don't think you people appreciate the amount of restraint I displayed here by not knocking all those. Oh, I just wanted so bad to throw something.
Are you OCD in that way?
Yeah, exactly.
As governor, what changes would you make in the health and welfare department or in those boxes?
Let me answer the question by saying I think the solution to our problems moving forward is to get our economy growing much faster than it is. My focus is going to be economic development, doing things with our tax policy, improving our education system, addressing regulatory policies, bureaucracy and red tape, and trying to improve the image of our state so that Arizona, our economy grows much faster. About a year and a half or two ago, I was doing this presentation at an economic development forum in Chandler. And the next person on the program was the director of the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, Barry Broom. Most of the cities in Maricopa County, instead of each of them having an economic development office, they kind of pool their money and fund GPEC. And GPEC works to try to bring companies to Arizona, and in particular Maricopa County. Well, Barry gets up there and says that his organization, GPEC, had been tracking 300 companies that had left California because California was raising taxes and doing all kinds of crazy things on them. They had tracked 300 companies that had left California in just the previous 12 months. You know how many came to Arizona of the 300? One. Now, we're not going to get 300 out of 3. Well, and the audience says, where are they going? They're going to Texas, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Wyoming, Washington. Most of the states that he mentioned actually are states that don't have a state income tax. I think Arizona needs to be the 8th state in the country to eliminate the state income tax and replace it with a low-rate, broad-based sales tax. on almost all transactions in the, but we're not going to get 300 out of 300 companies that leave California. But given our proximity, we ought to be getting 70 or 90 or 102 or something. And if those companies were coming here at a much faster pace, get Arizonans back to work, get our average incomes. I want to grow the economy 8 to 10% each of the next 8 years. And if we did that, this $8.5 billion turns into about 15 without a tax increase, just by growing the pie. And then we use the extra pieces of that pie to help fix K-12, address issues in healthcare, higher education.
All right, you know what? We're going to wrap this up just because we could ask you questions all day, and I know you've got answers for them, but we got to turn to these people. Most of these people have to work, except for some retired guy back there. Thank you so much, Ken, for coming in. And you know what? Before we turn you loose, I know you're a man all about the numbers. We would like to thank Cobblestone Auto Spa, all their locations. This is good anywhere. This is a $100 detail gift card. We're going to start doing this every month for our special guests. So
cool.
Go get your car detailed from Cobblestone.
Now, wait a minute. Dennis Kavanaugh gets a pie and I have to wash my car?
No.
What is wrong? Thank you. I don't want your pie. No, no, don't you go there.
Can I tell you how capitalism works? You and Dennis strike a deal.
All right.
Split the pie, and split the car wash.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks so much. Ken Bennett, ladies and
All right.
gentlemen. Big round of applause.